But after the pretty massive buff from Dahlia back in 3.8, Firefly now gets a Novaflare buff 3 patches later, pushing her to be one of the best DPS units in the entire game in version 4.2. And they didn't actually change a lot. Firstly, Firefly's enhanced skill now also applies fire weakness to adjacent enemies. Normally you think that this doesn't really do anything, but this is actually very strong with Dahlia, who is her best in slot teammate. Because Dahlia helps to further reduce 26 toughness when only fire characters implant a weakness, this is actually 40 more toughness total per skill for Firefly, and super break damage is calculated based on the amount of toughness you reduce, so it's almost like directly increasing the damage multiplier. The second simple but also massive change is that Firefly now requires less break effect to gain her super break damage bonuses, and it was also increased from 50 to 150%, a whole 100%. The last change in the kit is her first bonus ability. The Rainbow Toughness Reduction is obviously now useless, right? And it was changed to 25% extra break effect in her ultimate, and Firefly can now extend the duration of her ultimate by up to 30% or about 42 action value when Firefly inflicts weakness break. This does sound incredibly OP at first, but I found that this doesn't actually extend properly if you are refreshing waves in Memory of Chaos. I'm not very sure if this is a bug because this creator server beta is a bit buggy. So unfortunately, if you are zero cycling, it's almost always useless there. But if you take quite a bit more than one cycle, it's still decent, I guess. As a result, it doesn't really change anything with the simulation unless it's actually bugged. Then it could give Firefly one extra turn. However, outside of that, it will be super useful for Apocalyptic Shadow, normally Arbitration, especially the King, or even Pure Fiction if you want to use Firefly there. So just to give a better perspective, one enhanced skill from Firefly before, inclusive of some breaks, dealt about 1.7 million damage. It's already very respectable, right? Now if you add the 40 toughness, 100% super break, and 25% break effect, it shoots up to 3 million damage or about 70%. So combined, previously a sustainer team with Rummy would deal about 65,000 DPV. This is higher than most of the top tier teams with the exception of Remembrance prior to version 4.2, but in patch 4.2, Firefly is now 86 to about 112,000 DPV. So yes, without accounting for extra shilling, this is actually higher than both Silver Wolf and the full Mono Remembrance team right now in the 3 target scenario, and the first in my calculation to hit 100,000 DPV at E0S1. So if you want to technically be more fair, E2 Firefly is actually about 140 to 160,000 DPV. However, for actual gameplay, there is a lot of Elation enemies right now, and a lot of them are single target with summons. The only good Elation enemy so far is Sparxie, but the 2 new bosses released back to back are horrible for fixed 3 target DPSs and are very much meant for bounce teams. So even though Firefly should technically be the #1 DPS team right now in terms of raw damage output, in game this isn't really true. We are going to need more 3 target stages that isn't completely dependent on elation mechanics for Firefly to actually be the #1 DPS. Regardless, her performance is still really good now in a lot of non-ideal scenarios because Sparxie is also a fire type, so Firefly does at least have some decent overlap there. Anyways, I touched on it a bit before, but her E2 also got changed. Instead of 1 extra turn every 2 turns, it's now 1 extra turn every turn if you break or defeat an enemy. In actual gameplay, it's quite hard to permanently be activating this against a more tanky elite or boss, unless it's Pure Fiction or something like that. In this case, you can only really use E2 once per break, which would have been the same as before, or about a 30% and 30k DPV increase. If you get a more ideal scenario where the enemies can refresh or like they can change phases very often, then it can be a 46% or 50k DPV increase. However, what I dislike is that E2 still cannot carry over into new waves. Recent limited 5-star characters do have this quality of life feature, like very recently Ashville's follow-up attack can actually carry over. So I don't really see a reason why Firefly is still unable to do this. You basically lose a turn's worth of damage for no reason if you end the wave on Firefly's first skill. The other thing I really disliked is her E4, so it really surprised me that they didn't change it at all. All it does is increase her effect resistance by 50%. Like, it literally does nothing because the break team can already prevent enemies from taking more than 1 action. It's such a useless fucking Eidolon, and it's kinda sad that they didn't change this at all for players who want to get E4 or even E6, because recently the modern E4s at least kinda do something for you. Thankfully, it doesn't affect affect most players, but it's still a really missed opportunity to get rid of this disgusting Eidolon. And that is actually all of Firefly's changes, most of them tiny but very impactful. Since the kit doesn't change as much as Celia or Welts, literally everything about her builds and team building are still the same. The only new information I have for you is the actual numbers for using Harmony MC, Runmei or Lingsha as the 4th slot. Just take note that ideally with E2 Firefly for tanky bosses, you don't want to be using Runmei, otherwise you can't break again to make full use of Runmei. In that case, you should always be using Harmony MC, or if you want to sustain, Lingsha, but in most cases, if you have E2 Firefly, it's probably going to be Harmony MC with Dance anyway. I do have some E2 runs to showcase, but I will be uploading that in a separate video. So for now, thanks for watching and goodbye.